maybe you can speak to how conscious or deliberate it is, but by people in government over the past few decades wanting government to work less not work as well for people, right? Where you have these kind of complicated hoops to go through, or you can even look at the Sam brought up the now direct filing system that was rolled out this year by the Biden administration for your taxes. Why did people have to pay TurboTax $150 for their state and federal returns prior to this, except to give the company a lot of money, but also to make people feel like, oh man, I've got to shell out money to pay my taxes instead of the government just giving me the tools to do so, for example.
Yeah, I mean, I think you make a really great point with this. On the one hand, the conservative right is saying, oh, well, business can do things better than government can. And then on the other hand, what they're doing is using that to both shrink the size of government and, as you point out, to show how ineffective government is by forcing you to have to shell out money to have to deal with them. So it's like a multiple front war on government that the conservative right is waging with its tactics of privatization, but also attacks on government generally, and undermining the efficacy of government on so many levels. And I think social services, and especially when we're talking about low-income Americans, who are particularly vulnerable and particularly prone to be pawns in a lot of political debates that are racialized, that prey on kind of the worst instincts that we have toward who is deserving and not in this country. And the conservative right is using that as the wedge to undermine government more generally. I think you're absolutely right.
Right.
All right. Yeah. So in terms of the Medicaid, how do you deal with that? Like, where is that problem happening? Like, what is the fun? What creates that?
Yeah, that is a really complex question, actually. With There's a broader problem with the privatization of Medicaid. So in about half of states, Medicaid is run by private for-profit insurance companies who get paid what's called capitated basis, like a set amount per patient. So basically you end up kind of rationing care. So that's happening in about half of states. So Iowa, for instance, did this back in 2015. And one thing that the auditors in Iowa discovered was that illegal denials of care rose by 900% in the years following the privatization of Medicaid. So one obvious solution would be to kind of stop the privatization train when it comes to Medicaid. When it comes to stuff like dentistry, when you have the providers that are in this space, it's not going to be enough just to raise the rates, unfortunately, because what will happen initially in something like dentistry is that the rates go up, the Medicaid dentists will just make more because you're not getting other dentists to come in there and provide the services. Community health centers, I think, is one option for providing quality care or better quality care to children who need it, probably in the dentistry space and others. But it's a really multifaceted problem that probably would take another 3 hours to talk about. But I think the first couple steps here is to stop the privatization where we can and to really take a hard look at why in certain sectors this is happening.
So, it sounds like the most direct solution is a Medicaid for all or a Medicare for all type of program where you would have to require dentists and medical providers to, at the very least, people can debate about whether you need to get rid of private insurance in this instance, but at the very least, you'd have to sort of require 80% of the people who walk through your door have to be enrolled or be paying through a Medicare for all or a Medicaid for all or a single payer healthcare program so that you couldn't sort of sequester these groups of people and create a sort of factory business model for them.
Yeah, I mean, you got to fix the supply side. You're absolutely right. I mean, so long as you have Medicaid doctors and Medicaid dentists and that industry that does segregate the Medicaid patient population, you're never going to have a solution for the disparities that so many people face around this when it comes to healthcare.
Let's talk about, and we have this problem in dialysis, I guess, too.
Dialysis is, yeah. So I think about the poverty profiteers in kind of three big buckets. It's chapter on each kind of industry, but they're the skimmers, and those are the EITC folks we're talking about. They're the monopolist contractors, and those are the Job Corps contractors we just discussed. And then this third category of opportunists, industries that make most of their money from persistent poverty and its consequences, such as kidney failure. And that's where dialysis comes in. The disproportionate number of people who have kidney failure in the United States are low income and or minority because of these decades of health disparities that we've been talking about. The vast majority of dialysis treatments given in the United States are provided by just two companies, the duopoly of Fresenius and DaVita. And just to give you an example of how much money were involved here, DaVita made about $12 billion in 2023, and 2/3 of that money came from Medicare. So the government actually pays for the vast majority of dialysis treatment in the United States. And again, these two companies have chased out or consolidated nonprofit providers. It's a volume business because the dialysis centers have chairs that need to be filled as often as possible. And they've been prosecuted for things like paying kidney doctors to send patients their way instead of perhaps referring them to life-saving transplants. 5-year survival rate for transplant, 90%. 5-year survival rate for being on dialysis, 40%. Where is the money though? Dialysis.
What's to prevent the U.S. government from setting up dialysis centers? I mean, this is one of those things where I would imagine there's not much of a difference in treatment between a dialysis center in one part of New York versus another part of New York. I mean, dialysis is dialysis. It's not, there's not a lot of like moving part. I don't know if there's moving parts, but you get my like,
yeah.
There's not a lot of room for disparate levels of treatment in terms of the dialysis.
Well, actually, there can be. The SEIU has actually filed suit against dialysis providers in California, I think it's DaVita, for increasing the speed of the treatment disproportionately against minority patients, and thereby causing high blood pressure, heart problems, things like that. There was a complaint that was filed. And of course, the faster you do the treatment, the more patients you can have, right? So there are disparities in treatment. I think actually the solution here is not so much at the dialysis center level, but at the prevention of getting people on dialysis in the first place. We've got to fix the root problems that are leading to the trifecta of diabetes, high blood pressure, heart disease that put so many people on the path to kidney failure. You can take away their patients and also provide the better care. But if we can fix those health disparities, you can sap the power of the duopolies in a much more effective way and really improve the quality of life, because you don't want to be on dialysis.
Well, I get that, but I mean, some people,
Oh,
some
yeah.
people are, you have kidney cancer, and as you get older, you have one kidney and it becomes, and it fails. I mean, there's going to be dialysis on some
Sure.
level or another. It just seems like that is a perfect example, again, of like, you can have people who cut corners, but
Yeah.
in terms of like, there is, it seems to me there's a baseline of quality, and there's not much divergence above that baseline. Why couldn't government set up these centers?
Yeah, I mean, we have decided though, as a country that we're going to pay private dialysis providers through Medicare. That's the biggest obstacle.
All right. Well, let's touch on housing, because that's a big issue that is increasingly problematic in our society. Housing, we see another iteration of this, where we went from building public housing to essentially a voucher program.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so kind of like the dentists and in other places, now we have Section 8 landlords. And you can find YouTube videos actually of people who talk about how they can make a lot of money with Section 8 housing, because the payments are regular. There's a wait list because there's a shortage of affordable housing out there. There's one guy named Peter Harris who allegedly taped a series of lectures with Donald Trump for Trump University on commercial real estate, had tips like, don't have garbage disposals or screen doors, just get, and that kind of tells you that the quality of housing provided by real estate management companies that specialize in affordable housing, Section 8 housing in this way, it's probably not the kind of, housing that you would want to live in typically. And the other problem is that we haven't managed to break concentrated poverty because, again, the landlords who are in this space pretty much concentrate themselves in low-income areas. And the purpose of vouchers was to try to help people move out of high poverty areas into areas that have a little bit more economic diversity. And that hasn't happened because of the capture of the marketplace, again, by for-profit providers that focus on this market, exploit it for all it's worth, provide subpar products, and treat the tenants poorly.
And what about, say, shelters, for example, as it relates to unhoused people? Is that in part, affected by some of this, I guess, planned inefficiency?
Yeah, I don't address the homeless, the unhoused population, and the solutions for them specifically in the book. I know New York City has had some serious problems with contracting with entities that are providing, or not providing housing for people who don't have it. There needs to be kind of a top to bottom reform of how we provide. We need to provide more affordable housing. We need to provide affordable housing in parts of the communities that are not just certain areas, but diffused throughout. We need to look at zoning. We need to look at land use. We need to be more generous in the amount of help that we give people, and we need to give a lot more people help because the percentage of low-income people who have access to subsidies, who are eligible for it, is minuscule compared to the need.
So what, in the end, in your mind, like we have the policy prescriptions on some level, right? I mean, how do these changes happen? Because it seems to me like there has to be a change in an ideological framework for an administration to come in, let's say, and begin to make these changes within each of these silos. Like it's not, it's conceivable that, somebody might wake up one day at an agency that oversees some of this and say, there's a more efficient way of doing this, but there seems to have to be an ideological change that goes away from, Reagan saying the most dangerous words in the English language are "I'm from the government, I'm here to help," to, frankly, Clinton and their initiative to make a leaner, meaner government. Because the idea that this shrinks government is also absurd. If you're wasting 10 to 15% on the earned income tax rate, you're not shrinking government. You're just basically, this is what sort of like classical neoliberalism is. It's getting a hold and influencing the government to fund certain industries and certain players within, industries. What is the broad ideological change that has to happen, if that's what you think has to happen to make a change, a wholesale change across the board?
Yeah, I mean, good luck trying to get any politician to embrace this, but the ideological change has to be an embrace of government again. We got to get off the privatization train that we've all been on for 40 years, not us on this call, but government in general. And this idea that government can't perform. And I think that's been pounded into the citizens' heads for so many years that it's really difficult to come up with a message that's going to begin resonating. I do think that the direct file program that we've been talking about is one way to kind of demonstrate to American people that, look, the government can do something for you that is effective, efficient, will save you money, and get you the refund that you deserve. Unfortunately, that program only reached about 140,000 households last year. And
well, that was a pilot program, but now they're rolling it out for everybody, right?
They are, but the conservatives are trying to shut it down. And companies have actually spent tens of millions of dollars. ProPublica had a great investigation about the amount of money that Intuit and H&R Block have spent over the years to have legislation to block the IRS from providing either a direct file, and they've also opposed any sort of tax simplification, so to lessen the demand so that people can do their taxes on their own. So we're up against some pretty powerful forces here that are determined to keep these structures in place, shrink the government even more. Project 2025, by the way, has privatization practically on every other page about what they want to do. And they have horrific plans for slashing social services, handing more and more over to the private sector. And so if they get their hands on government next year, we're going to see a lot more of what's happening than less. And so it could become even more difficult to turn things around if we're not careful this fall.
And Kim, contributing editor at Washington Monthly Magazine. The book is Poverty for Profit, How Corporations Get Rich Off of America's Poor. We didn't even talk about private prisons. We've talked about that in the past in general, both in terms of like the services that come into prisons and just the entire private prison racket. Nor did we reference, but I feel obligated to, the Chicago parking meters story from 2015, which was also a prime example of just the horrible ideas behind privatization of these things. A really important book. Really appreciate it. We'll put a link to it at majority.fm.
Thank you so much.
Hey, folks, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and check out our daily show. We do it every day at 12 p.m. Eastern for about 2.5 hours. We even take phone calls. You should check that out.